Right. So today, like I said, we'll learn about the town of South Denver. And I know what you're thinking. Town? What does she mean? So I know most people think that South Denver is just referring to a geographic location, but in actuality, it was a full-blown incorporated town that existed in the area of Baker, Wash Park, all the way down to Inglewood. Phil Goodstein wrote it beautifully by saying, time and again, people have moved to this area to escape what they didn't like about other parts of Denver. They hope to obtain a secure, peaceful, pleasurable family existence. But once settled, they discovered that they have to work to obtain and preserve their desired goals. The result has been over a century of political activism where numerous civic organizations, improvement groups, and neighborhood committees have started in the name of enhancing and defending this area. So this is the story of South Denver. So as you can see from this timeline, what we're going to be talking about today is relatively short. From the official incorporation of the town in 1886 to the annexation, only 8 years had passed. But in those 8 years, an absolutely incredible amount was accomplished. We have a lot to cover, but I hope you stick with me on this one because this groundwork laid the foundation for the area of Denver that we all know and love today. And many of these stories will sound familiar in fights that we are still waging in our neighborhoods decades later. So the story begins with a gold rush. In 1858, William Russell tried to find gold and ended up striking it rich on Little Dry Creek. William H. Russell owned a successful freighting company out of Leavenworth, Kansas, that brought wagon trains full of supplies to forts throughout the West. This discovery and the rumors with it spurred some young men to set forth from Lawrence, Kansas, hoping to find gold. John Smith and a party of Mexicans ended up striking gold around Virginia Avenue, where the South Platte River is today. These expeditions did not find a lot of gold, only about 10 cents worth of gold for every wagon load of dirt, but it spurred the excitement which set so many folks out on the same path for themselves. In May of 1858, 40 men left Lawrence, Kansas in 12 wagons known as the Easter Party. They tried to find the old site of the previous gold discoveries and decided to retrace their steps and went along Cherry Creek until it connected with the South Platte River near modern-day Confluence Park. And they discovered gold once again. The Easter Party from Lawrence was less interested in digging gold and more interested in building cities because they felt that although the gold will run out, the need for services, housing, and food will make them much more rich than gold ever will. That's when Montana City was founded. When the gold ran out in the creek, they moved all of their buildings up to where Confluence Park is today and where the town of Denver City and Auraria began. The rest is history. Although the settlements of Montana City, Denver City, and Auraria took off, not everyone wanted to live near the big city. Several folks were far-sighted and moved further outside the city to pursue something other than gold mining. They were not convinced that the gold strikes would carry them or their families into fortune. So let's meet the cast of players that helped create the town of South Denver. Rufus Clark was one of, if not the very first person to formally settle in this area. He was one of those who realized it was easier to get gold from the miners rather than mine the gold himself. So Rufus set up a shop on a very fertile strip of land along the Platte River and began to grow wheat, onions, and potatoes. In 1880, he ended up buying an additional 280 acres to grow his crops. And then the entirety of Section 26, which housed where the University of Denver is today. He was so successful in his first crop of potatoes that he earned the nickname Potato Clark. He would charge 35 cents per pound and earned himself $30,000 in that first crop, which was also almost $1 million today. He had a very adventurous life. He was a runaway and in 1838 joined a sea vessel and worked for 15 years on merchant ships and whalers. Rufus wound up in California just in time for the 1849 gold rush. He was even rescued from a shipwreck in Samoa in 1852. After that, he claimed to have walked 400 miles from the Australian gold fields to Melbourne after he felt the mining conditions there were intolerable. He settled down in 1854 in Iowa, and then the gold rush pulled him to Colorado. Rufus was a very generous man, and the story goes that when he heard about the Chicago fire in 1871, he decided he should auction off his potatoes and send the money to charity. He ended up raising about $190,000 today, as well as numerous items of hats, guitars, boxes of oysters, etc. for all the victims. And Rufus, he was morbidly alcoholic. And after a religious intervention, he became a staunch prohibitionist and a major force for the development of South Denver and many of its future anti-liquor policies. Rufus is more widely known for the donation of 150 acres of land that would become the foundation for the University of Denver. With this donation came a few conditions on how the land was to be developed. Clark required the planting of trees, laying out a street grid, and that alcohol would never be sold in that area. Although the surrounding areas allowed for distribution of alcohol, a $3,500 saloon license fee was established to discourage establishments from selling alcohol near the university site. And this discouragement of the use of alcohol is the source of some of the old covenants against the creation or distribution of alcohol for homes within that area today. Clark passed away in 1911, and his house at 1398 South Santa Fe Drive was torn down in 1957. You can kind of see a picture here. So you can see in green where his land was. John Daly and William Byers were friends back when they both speculated land together in Central City, Nebraska. The Panic of 1857 destroyed their savings and their town, and all of their investments went under. John Daly moved and went into the printing business near Sioux City, Iowa. In 1859, William Byers had given up and said he was going to go try his luck and go west to Pikes Peak and try his hand at starting a newspaper. Even though William Byers had no experience, John Daly decided to join him and brought his experience. He wrote the first half of the first issue of the Rocky Mountain News when they left Omaha. They arrived in Denver with their printing press on April 17, 1859, and had the first edition printed less than a week later. Byers was the editor and spokesman of the paper, and John was the printer and foreman. There was a little bit of rivalry between Denver City and Auraria, and so not to piss off one of the cities, they built the newspaper office in between them, literally on top of Cherry Creek. We know now that that wasn't a good idea, because in the 1864 flood, John, who lived at the news office, almost drowned when he was swept away along with the news office building. And you can see a picture here of the flood, and see how one of the buildings is just kind of teetering. So imagine their building just lifting up and floating away. So in 1861, John Daly bought land in South Denver between 5th and Ellsworth. So he's in blue here. And he constructed a 3-room cabin on it. He lived in this modest house for years and added on rooms. Since there were so few buildings and people in the area, John Daly's home became the meeting place for all kinds of activities, including church. Their small house was even the site of the first school in the area. He ended up founding the First Unitarian Church in 1871. And then in 1882, they ended up putting a brick shell around the original house, and it became the grand house scene here at 425 Broadway. 1865, Thomas. It was almost so the house was an absolute Victorian show home. And much like everyone else in Denver at the time, John lost most of his money in the silver crash of 1893. He had to sell a portion of his land back to the city of Denver because he could not afford it. And the city felt his pain, and as a way to honor his achievements in the formation of the town of South Denver, but also his role in the newspaper, the land they took, they named Daly Park. And they created that park in 1907. He ended up dying 1 year later. So you guys probably know Daly Park, so that was part of his land. John Daly's brother, William Daly, was very industrious as well, and he started the Daly and Company Real Estate Company and focused on selling Broadway-specific properties. He also had a huge chunk of land west of John's home all the way to the Platte River, and I believe a lot of it was named Archer. So here's William Byers. William Byers brought his wife, 2 children, and John Daly with him on his journey to Denver City. He spent the rest of his money on a printing press and brought it with him across the plains. In 1859, he purchased 680 acres of land in South Denver, and that's him shown in teal, that could produce food without irrigation. He planted sugar beets and watermelons and pioneered that crop here in Denver. He built a small log house with a board roof, no floor, and the grass roots were still exposed on the ground. He said that most of the houses in Denver had mud roofs, but he didn't want all of their very few fine things ruined constantly by the mud dripping on them. And they didn't have much but a cook stove, nice silverware, napery, and that was about it. And with the success of the newspaper, they built a house in downtown Denver, but spent their summers at their small ranch house in South Denver. The flood of June 1864 was a devastating year for them. They were preparing to leave for higher ground, and when they stepped outside, the river suddenly cut through a low strip of land and left them marooned on a little island. Neighbors were concerned about them, and they got Colonel Shivington to build a boat and save them. The Byers family were critical in the formation of the town of South Denver, and William contributed much of his money, much like others. He was part of the moral reform, church development, political advancement, railroad building, and agricultural experimentation. Byers himself named many of the roads throughout the area, although many names have changed since its original design. He created the first agricultural society and also was the South Denver postmaster for a while. And after Byers left the newspaper business, he was actively a part of the Denver Tramway Company, which transitioned this area from horse cars to modern electric streetcars. He was one of the reasons South Denver had a robust electrical system for so many years, and he unfortunately was a major supporter in the policies that led to the Sand Creek Massacre, which has tarnished his reputation. Mrs. Byers, being appalled at the poverty-stricken stranded families and deserted wives of miners and the homeless children wandering the streets of Denver, she founded the Ladies Union Aid Society and walked door to door gathering funds. And one day she raised and in 1893, they built the Working Boys Home and School. It was originally a 1516 Lincoln, but moved to Alameda and Acoma, where it still stands today, and they renamed it the Byers School for Boys. The home they built at 171 South Washington was demolished in 1920 after Mrs. Byers' death to make way for the Byers Junior High School, which is now known as DSST Cedar. And then we have James Fleming. James and his family arrived in Denver a little bit later than everyone else. He purchased the land that is now known as Platt Park in 1883, and he built a large mansion for himself and his 11 other siblings and family members. James sunk the first artisan well at the cost of $80,000 and allowed the free use of it by South Denver citizens. He also donated $5,000 to build the cable and electric streetcar roads. He was a great leader and was elected numerous times to be the mayor of South Denver. Under his leadership, he was able to raise $160,000 in that small little town to build out the extensive water system, and it was fully paid for. He helped install 6 miles of rapid transit, cable cars, and electric cars due to his untiring zeal. They said, when his shoulder is at once at the wheel, he knows no such thing as failure. To his credit, the selling points of the town as they were touted by residents said that it possesses superior advantages as a place or home: pure air, abundance of water, sightlines to the mountains, rapid transit, and no saloons. So these guys are key players that will make up the story of South Denver in its earliest beginnings and really help set the stage for development. But how did they do it? So Thomas Garrett and others who lived further south of Rufus Potato Clark's land supplied the city with the crops they needed to feed the masses. But they had to travel along the harsh and meandering Santa Fe Trail with their wagons and teams, and it was difficult to get to the markets. Garrett wanted the road improved for farmers living to the south of Denver and enable them to bring their agricultural products to Denver. So in 1871, Thomas Garrett and his sons locked the wheels of his heavy farm wagon and cut into the soil by dragging a straight track along the stakes he laid out from his farm near Hamden all the way up to Cherry Creek. They dragged a heavy log behind them to level it, and they did this 3 times back and forth on the entire route. That right-of-way was established on August 31st, 1898, to form a thoroughfare of full and uniform width of 100 feet, and they called it Broadway. So John Daly and William Byers were lovers of trees, and so shade trees were planted by Scarrett and John Daly after Scarrett improved the road around 1871, 1872. They planted all of the trees stretching from 6th Avenue all the way down to Jewel. And I kind of put a little map here showing exactly where they put all those trees. They were clever, and they planted maple trees along Maple Avenue, and it became named after that. Then they planted cedar trees on Cedar, which became named after that as well. So you could see the red for the maple, and then the line of cedar trees on Cedar Avenue. Then on Alameda, which is a Spanish word for an avenue lined with poplar or cottonwood trees, they planted cottonwood trees. And apparently there are still a few huge cottonwood trees along Alameda near Corona that you can look for when you drive down. So in this image of from the 1880s, seen here, you can see where the cedar trees were planted along the road, right along there. I don't know if you could see that. But John Daly ended up being a big proponent of creating parks within Denver. And in 1893, he actually became the president of the city's first park board. So looking at these pictures, see just how absolutely desolate it was. They were committed to, making it beautiful. So Cherry Creek was a blessing and a curse. The blessing was that it helped supply water to the town. And the curse was the ebbs and flows of the water level, which created a dangerous barrier between South Denver and Denver. A bridge was crucial to gain an easier connection to downtown in order for all the farmers to get their foods to the market. The city of Denver wouldn't pay for the bridge over Cherry Creek, so Thomas Scarrett went ahead and built a plank bridge himself with logs that were buried so that they wouldn't wash away in the fast-moving water. And finally, in 1873, seeing the need and the increased traffic of all the food South Denver was bringing into Denver proper, the city of Denver commissioned a new bridge. And then in 1879, Avery Gallup bought acreage on South Broadway in Alameda. He built a cottage there and began selling lots and building greenhouses. And he was so successful that he built a massive mansion with lush gardens everywhere. He platted 4 additions to the city and helped turn a piece of trackless prairie into the town of South Denver. Avery Gallup was the founder of the Gallup Seed Company, Gallup Flour and Seed Company, but his wife Charlotte ran the business. They constructed the large greenhouses on the corner of Alameda and Broadway between Lincoln and Sherman, and you can see in the image on the bottom right, you can see the long structure at the bottom right corner. That's the greenhouse, and then you can see the sketch of it in the newspaper above there. And then in 1887, the Gallups were also instrumental in the formation of the town of Littleton. And they purchased 720 acres on the east side of Littleton, and Charlotte filled up the first plat for, and it was named Gallup's Suburban Home Subdivision. Many of the trees, plants, and beautiful lawns that developed around Denver are thanks to their importing of exotic trees and plants. They helped to beautify this little patch of Colorado. And then in 1881, a man named J.L. Russell bought a large plot of greenhouses from Avery Gallup, and Russell also became a large figure in South Denver's history. And water was a big deal in South Denver. Many folks in the area believed so much in making this area successful, and John W. Smith and William Byers dug a huge ditch that meandered 24 miles from Littleton, then all the way through this area, and brought water and irrigation beginning in 1867. This led to Smith's Ditch, which is still present in Washington Park today. Smith did not take care of his ditches very well, though, and in 1874, the ditch collapsed at its source during the driest part of the year. Luckily, there were frequent showers that year, or else the thousands of trees that these men had just planted would have died. In 1875, Smith sold his lake, which is Smith's Lake in Wash Park, and the city allowed him to build an ice house on it as long as he kept the lake constantly filled with water. Today, Smith's Ditch, now known as City Ditch, is Denver's oldest working thing. And fun fact, the ditch is now on the National Register of Historic Places. So next time you're walking through Wash Park and you wonder why there's just this ditch full of water, that's why. The first well was dug at 1 South Lincoln in 1882. This well piped water all the way through to 4th and Broadway. And in 1889, water pumps and lines were laid, and 2 million gallons of water were pumped per day through this town. And again, this is an unincorporated town, and they're doing all these things. Actually, at this point, they were incorporated, but still, they're making all these improvements in their area without the support of Denver, just their own. Then 2 hose companies opened, and one of them was the John L. Russell Hose Company. He's the same man who took over the Gallups greenhouses. The hose house was built on the corner of Broadway and Center in 1891, and they needed the water to help fight fires down in South Denver. And by the summer of 1889, the town of South Denver invested $160,000 to bring water to the houses. They developed the pump station, and they said that for $5 for 6 months, all of the grass borders, the trees on the tree lawns in the whole area could be watered. So they were trying to $5 was a lot back then, but $5 for 6 months and you can have a nice green yard, great. They really envisioned a garden-like town filled with lush gardens and plentiful food everywhere. And there were many people who dreamed of what South Denver could be. William H. Loveland was one of them. In 1878, he purchased William Byers' stake in the Rocky Mountain News for $800 and a horse named Prince. I think it's a pretty good deal. Loveland created a grand vision for the development of South Denver and saw it as a chance to improve upon what he felt Denver had gotten wrong. He and others dreamed of turning this rural suburb into an urban neighborhood complete with public transportation all throughout the area and hoped to bring more people to live here. He wanted to transport Denverites all around, utilizing the city's depots and developing parks and business hubs along those routes and depots. So taking the next step, he founded the Denver Circle Railroad. In 1878, after the wood plank bridge across Cherry Creek was lost in a flood, it was replaced with one that would allow a horse car line to be extended to South Broadway to Alameda by the Denver City Railroad Company. There's a lot of different railroad companies. The goal of the Denver Circle Railroad was to spur growth and enhance real estate values along where the lines ran. They dreamed that along Cherry Creek South and west of it, that a new city would spring up if it had rapid communication with a big city. He wanted people to have healthy, comfortable homes instead of being huddled together in close quarters with others due to the high rents of living in a big city. He didn't want the only reason people lived like that to be because they had to live close to downtown because of their jobs. He proposed to lay out gardens and parks and pleasing streets where people can spend their evenings pleasantly in the summer months. And this idea spurred a ton of development and investment. These streetcar suburbs had a lasting impact on our neighborhood today, with up until the 1940s, about 90% of the trips to downtown Denver were made via streetcars or public transportation. Streetlights were also installed, and a very large 80-foot tower on Broadway was constructed with 300 arc lights that had to be manually lit and extinguished each day. I wish I had a photo of that. In 1881, plans were developed to draw people to the area, and they pushed forward to create a national mining and industrial exposition situated on the land between Broadway and Logan and Virginia Avenue and Exposition Avenue. Others thought it was a great idea too, and the city and Denver City of Denver purchased the land to build the mining exhibition. William H. Loveland began trading land between Virginia and Mississippi Avenue and Broadway to Clarkson and purchased it on behalf of the Denver Circle Railroad. Their land is shown in red here. He had named it the Circle Railroad Investment Company because he wanted the railroad to create a beltway around Denver and South Denver to make it easier to get around. The Circle Railroad then began to subdivide these lots and tracts and hoped to sell the lots for not less than $100 an acre. And as early as March 20th, 1882, they began selling the lots. And with great excitement, advertisements exclaimed that the exposition building will soon be commenced, large hotels will shortly be erected, and other public as well as private improvements are about to be inaugurated on a grand scale in this locality that will beautify and greatly enhance the value of this property. They even said choice of elegant lots adjoining the exposition grounds and buildings. And adjoining the exposition is the most desirable location of businesses, houses, and residence sites ever offered to the public. Most of the platted subdivisions were divided and developed based on these anticipated streetcar lines. Each time a streetcar line was expanded, more houses and small businesses would pop up along the routes. The Denver Times wrote that the South Side must be given substantial credit for having first set in motion the ball that rapidly gathered force as it moved along, and it has so revolutionized the transit system of our entire city and suburbs. So they commissioned Willoughby Edbrook to design the exquisite exposition building that stood as a jewel box on the plains. Built in 1882, the building was a stunning two-story hall of nearly 150,000 square feet, and it was built in the general form of a Maltese cross. It contained a large exposition hall supplied with an orchestra, a stage, private rooms, broad galleries, and a grand balcony. A spur of the Circle Railroad ran right through the building for transportation exhibits. There was a tall stucco fountain featuring water cascading from the top, and it stood in front of the magnificent building which faced Logan Street. 18,000 people showed up on opening day in 1882, and one of the main features was a gold brick worth $1.75 million today. The promise that the exposition brought this area was coming to life. It said that everyone in Colorado visited the National Mining Exposition before it closed for good 2 years later in 1884. To draw even more allure, they had even renamed some of the streets. The 600 block used to be Indiana Avenue, but was renamed Exposition. Center Avenue was originally named Illinois Avenue, but they chose Center because it arrived and cut through the center of the exposition. To give the event a Western atmosphere, the sponsors arranged for 34 Ute Indians to camp on the grounds, and promoters presented the Indians as a novelty fully equal to the festival's mineral treasures. Overall, the exposition was a success. However, it was expensive to take the train, and within a couple of years, they shut down the exposition and the building sat empty. Plans to save the building failed. The building unfortunately and then was torn down in 1888. It became known afterwards as Sans Souci Park. The lovely grounds were used for picnics and outdoor parties for many years by locals, and the land was sold to H. Halifax, John Knox, and John McDermott, who wasted no time in platting the site into the Exposition Addition. By 1890, the land lay undeveloped, and the area was so neglected that 16 neighbors petitioned the town to clean up old tin cans, rags, old newspapers, rubbish, and a gang of dogs surrounding a junk shop on the premises. The fountain remained until 1902 when they improved the street and destroyed it, unfortunately. I was delivering flyers a couple months ago at a house on between Center, kind of right where the tracks would be, and they were just redoing their entire front yard and digging it up, and I saw 2 railroad spikes that they had found in their yard, and I thought that was the coolest thing, and I had to tell them on their Ring camera what they found, because it was probably part of the Denver Circle Railroad line that went through there. All right. So businesses started popping up, and significant investments were being made by people living in Denver who saw this area really picking up as an investment opportunity. The very first grocery store to arrive was at 140 Broadway, owned by William Butters. William Butters opened a meat market at 100 Broadway, and his store was at 140 Broadway. It was a 20 by 32 structure. And at the time, there were so little people that many people questioned his undertaking. It was added onto to create a tin cannery for preserving vegetables. And he found his canning business so profitable that he partnered with William M. Daley and created a spin-off of Butters Market and created Butters Manufacturing Company to can the vegetables. And that was at Bayard and 11th Street for their factory. And that's what the picture is there. The first bakery was established by Henry Reitz in January of 1859. He started it in a log cabin on the west side, and it was only about 16 foot square. The first jewelry shop was opened by Jamie Ramage, and one blacksmith shop by Thomas Pollock. They also noted that one of the first lines of businesses established on Broadway was a drugstore, and they made sure to note in the newspaper that although the South Side is noted for its healthfulness, yet no community can get along without those things usually contained in a first-class pharmacy. At 132 South Broadway was the first pharmacist, C.K. Skinner. At the time in 1859, there was only one saloon in town. And the bulk of the businesses were really popping up south of First Avenue and closer to the exposition grounds. In 1884, an announcement was made that a livery stable will soon be built on South Broadway and that a bakery will be created. It noted that the town is glad to see a butcher shop come in with connection to Hunter and Killy's grocery store, and they felt the location was a great convenience to the current residents. They were putting out some feelers, too, into the world, and they said if some enterprising blacksmith would open up a shop on the south side, he would do some good business. There's also room for a harness maker and a shoemaker. Amongst other notes, they said, the town wanted to make sure that if you were building a house, that they needed to see Mr. J.O. Patterson first so that he can paint the numbers on your house. They were excited because their postmaster, Mr. Morris, also had just written a letter to Washington to request authority to have mail to be delivered to the South Side. One of the business blocks on South Broadway in Maple was owned by a Mr. Polk, and he ran a coal and feed business. He was known as one of the earliest settlers, and they mentioned that when he first started his business, that his building was considered pretty well out of town and a little too far for businesses. But they said that now there's no better business locality on the south side than Polk's Corner. L. Mills & Co. operated at Polk's Block also, and they were a meat market. So this map here is from 1887, but it shows the location of the original Butters Market and canned goods shop, and you can see that they ended up also getting their livery and a blacksmith shop. There was also a print shop and a feed store, and all of the staples that helped get South Denver up and running. All these rudimentary structures are gone now and replaced with the first large-scale commercial structures on the street, which became the First Avenue Hotel and the Mayan Theater. But it's really cool to see what South Denver first looked like here on this little tiny strip. The printing shop is the first printing shop of the South Denver Eye at 130 Broadway, and they were also printing the South Denver Advocate there, which was their first little pamphlet. So saloons quickly emerged around the exposition hall, taking advantage of the minimal competition. To help capture guests coming from the exposition, Sanssouci was created. To boost poor attendance of the exposition, a promoter worked with William Loveland and decided to introduce a night for the sporting event, which is a euphemism for the underworld that included gamblers, pimps, and prostitutes. While mild to start, the night would become legendary for its booze-filled sex and brawling. The big night at Sanssouci, from all reports, formed one of the striking bits of conversation around South Denver for a long time after. But it carried on quietly between the men. 1 year after it opened, a Mrs. Jennings from New York bought Sanssouci for $11,000. Another saloon opened called York Cottage, or the Louis York Saloon, at Broadway in Alaska. The South Denver residents were fed up with the attractions, including the shenanigans of Joe Lowe's saloons at Broadway Park and Ed Chase's betting stand at Overland Park. There was also an annoying establishment at Broadway in Dakota owned by nearby horse dealer David Loster. He operated the drinking establishment with his wife. Charles Patman, who had been a leading Leadville tavern owner, also made a presence felt at his roadhouse on South Santa Fe near West Mississippi, a place sometimes called as Brant's Grove. James Fleming was particularly annoyed by Broadway Park, which is on the Circle Railroad and near to James's house. He wanted nothing to do with the liquor or sporting elements that these saloons and roadhouses had to offer. So initially, George Kettles, William Byers, and John Daly fought the battles of the South alone and unaided. They tried their hardest to keep the establishments in check, but the proliferation signaled this area's rapid growth and increased opportunities. James Fleming personally invested much of his wealth in the town's development, and to protect his investment, and was growing frustrated by the number of saloons and roadhouses. South Denver residents proposed creating a separate town in March 1884, but instead it led to the formation of the South Broadway Union Club to address the expansion and vision of a suburb ripe with public transportation and infrastructure, and to fight liquor licenses. The first meeting was at Killy Hall between 2nd and 3rd on Broadway on March 15, 1884. They drew up committees such as fire, water, lights, streets, mail, numbering, bylaws, and hall. Because there were so few men on this organization, several people took on the work of a couple committees. In order to make things official, since they did not have a city hall, they needed a way to record all of their processes and decisions. So A.E. Pierce founded the South Denver Advocate newspaper in 1884. It was just a 4-column small newspaper, but it helped provide some documentation that they would need if they ended up becoming a town. William Daly, John's brother, headed the Union Club, and Sans Souci was their first target. They were unsuccessful, and Sans Souci flourished until 1887. And whenever somebody wanted a liquor license, the Union Club would stroll up to the county commissioners and protest. The commissioners would repeatedly ignore their pleas. No amount of complaining would get Denver to do anything about the saloons. They described many times that the citizens of South Denver did not want this kind of disreputable established in their town. They described the South Side as different than Denver in that it is moral, law-abiding, community fighting against the combined influence of the saloon element. But Denver didn't care. And at the time, the University of Denver, which at the time was a purely Methodist school, wanted to move campuses, but they said they would only move to a town that was pure and liquor free. And having the university would put this part of the town on the map and be really good for investments. And so by 1885, South Denver had developed into a desirable residential area thanks to the streetcars and its distance away from the city's polluting smelters, but it was not an official town, so the university would not be able to move into it yet. So in 1886, Fleming, Gallup, and Rufus Clark were again even sicker of the roadhouses and the way that Denver's commissioners were ignoring them. They got plans and worked to develop a concrete plan to incorporate a town and pass ordinances that would be equivalent to what was seen as Prohibition era today. The ordinance became known as their anti-vice laws. Ultimately, they wanted to curb the liquor issues. And first, they developed the boundaries. It would be Alameda Avenue, Colorado Boulevard, Yale Avenue, and South Platte River. This covered the future University Park and the requirements that the university be free of saloons. Second, they created a petition to gather the support of the 150 property owners, but it did not include women and children. All the people that were living in their boundaries. The Denver Circle Railroad supported the incorporation in hopes of it helping their real estate investments. There were 15 non-resident investors and landowners who watched everything that was happening with alarm because they were ineligible to vote and felt powerless.
Internet product chosen by Clearbox. It's Omnia, the top-rated platform in this year's definitive Internet Buyer's Guide. Download your free copy today. in settings, or even sending a wrong message to someone. This can make you perform
Hold on, I'm
unintentional
just trying to mute.
actions. So the job of the sensor is that.
There we go. All right. So there were 15 non-resident investors and landowners who watched everything that was happening with alarm because they were ineligible to vote and felt powerless. The liquor prohibition and limitations within that petition alienated a lot of the Denver-based investors, bankers, and businessmen who had begun to invest heavily in the area. And the saloon owners were unquestionably furious. They received the support of 39 residents and filed the petition with the name of South Denver, and then this map shown on the screen. The courts accepted the petition with Rufus Clark, Frederick Johns, John L. Russell, John Babcock, and Samuel Succumb as commissioners to act as clerks in an incorporation election to be held within 6 weeks. The commissioners created pamphlets and handed it out to all residents and posted it in public spaces. They campaigned for votes. The prohibitionists assured people that the incorporation was for their own protection against the saloons. The pro-liquor campaigners campaigned equally as hard against the incorporation. They felt that the goodness and uprightness was too confining for a town. The saloon owners marched up and down Broadway trying to persuade them against voting for the incorporations. And during the incorporation election meeting, everyone gathered at the abandoned exposition building. 104 electors cast their votes. 65 people voted yes, 38 voted no, and on August 9, 1886, South Denver was officially incorporated and the anti-vice laws were starting to be put into place. The first town hall meeting met on September 4th, 1886 to elect their first officials. James Fleming became the first mayor. The second meeting was on September 18th, 1886 in the abandoned exposition building. They worked quickly to draw up lots of various strict laws and criminal code. They took tons of ideas from all the property owners and threw them into law. That's when they enacted the $3,500 liquor license fee. Again, this is $3,500 in 1886 dollars, and $2,500 for a retail license fee. Plus whoever was obtaining the license needed 50 signatures of nearby residents showing that the applicant is of good moral character. And alcohol could not be sold on Sundays or between midnight and 6 a.m. No one could sell alcohol to a minor, an apprentice, a habitual drunkard, or any insane, inundated, distracted, or intoxicated person. You couldn't even be visibly intoxicated in public or in a private place, which was a $10 fine, or a $25 fine afterwards every time you were caught. Repeat offenders would be jailed. Dance houses were allowed, but they outright banned all bawdy and disorderly houses of ill fame and and reputation, and no gambling ever. So on top of that, they banned dog fights, cockfights, and even fights between people. You could not fight in a duel, or even dress indecent or lewd, use vulgar terms, fire any guns, ride your horse recklessly, or throw stones at people or property. No vagrants were allowed, and prostitutes and habitual drunkards were also considered vagrants. And don't even think about having your horse or your cow run wild. If they were caught, they would be taken to the pound and you'd have to pay a fine. They also didn't want people injuring themselves, so no cellar door, well, pit, or vault could be left open for someone to accidentally fall into. So armed with this newfound authority, the town went out after the saloon element and kicked them all out of town. They felt successful when the first establishment to take over Sans Souci was Sister Eliza's Mission School for Girls. By Christmas, 20 of the 126 ordinances were filed. They did not have a newspaper yet, so they put the notices in a public space such as the Denver Railway Depot, James Fleming's own property, the Coronado Schoolhouse, the Ice House at Smith Lake, and the ticket office next to the exposition building. With the liquor establishments resolved, they turned to beautification. No straw, filth, manure, or rubbish can be thrown about. No dead animals. Candle factories, soap factories, tanneries, distilleries, smelters, chemical works, slaughterhouses, stockyards, foundries. They could only operate within 1 mile out of town if they received a permit, signed by 30 residents, and had a bond to show that they had money to build it. They fought ferociously against Governor Evans, who tried to bring his stockyards to South Denver 3 different times. The Fleming brothers enacted an ordinance that restricted the erection of all frame buildings for fire reasons, unless the mayor gave them a special permit. But here's the caveat, and I think this solves the mystery of why we can't find so many permits. Anybody could build a brick house anywhere in South Denver without building a permit. I love that. Mystery solved. And the permits were very challenging to attain, so many people built modest frame houses in open defiance of the law. Many contractors were jailed, and one sued the town and won, which required the anti-framed house construction ordinance to be invalidated. And 1887 was a boom year for South Denver. By 1889, nearly 100 houses were built. You can see on the map from 1889 how much land was purchased and platted for the anticipated developments. You can see Smith's Ditch roaming north and south through the area and through Wash Park today. Many of the original farmhouses on the original farms that you see here are still in this neighborhood. Their design is a little bit more rudimentary, and when you see them, you'll see that they have wraparound porches that look out of place for context because they were built before the platted lands were created, and it was for their farm. Many lawsuits were filed against the town, all with claims that the ordinances were not fully displayed or conveyed to the public because the town did not have a newspaper at the time after their laws were won. The town had to release these offenders from prison and return their fines. They were most worried about the liquor licenses because they knew now that based on these lawsuits that they had no power to stop these saloons from coming into town. On August 16, 1887, they reposted all of their ordinances and they were unchallenged. So this time the liquor laws were saved. This list here shows all the businesses located along Broadway in 1887. There weren't very many, but they had everything they needed. You can see that they still had one saloon hanging out down by the old exposition grounds, and I'm sure that one was a pain in the rear. With the saloon elements run out of town, investors began to run out of town too. The 15 non-resident landowners had 840 acres of land within the town. They loved the idea of development of this unincorporated town, but then they'd have to pay considerable taxes in an area that they would not get anything in return once it was incorporated. William Byers hired Bartle and Blood law firm to challenge the incorporation. And in November 27, 1886, Mayor Fleming and all the trustees were sued by the non-residents, saying that the town was not legally or constitutionally incorporated under the laws of the state of Colorado. They said that, one, they did not have the power to incorporate since they did not have a legislative body and it was only private citizens, and two, that there was vacant land that was not inhabited and could not constitute being allowed as part of the town's boundaries, and three, only about a third of their town was actually inhabited and therefore was not eligible. A countersuit was filed stating that they had insufficient grounds. The judge dismissed the case and William Byers was furious and filed an appeal. The trustees went back to building their town as they waited for the appeals since they had all confidence in what they were doing was right. By late 1886, A.E. Pierce founded the Denver Eye, which published all ordinances in their entirety. 1 year later, elections came about again, since each elected official only served for 1 year, and James Fleming was once again elected. William Byers was not giving up, though, and filed his case with the Supreme Court. Pierce presented his newspaper with the displaying of all ordinances as proof in court, and the Supreme Court case was dismissed. So by April 15, 1887, the town had 11 criminal cases filed against the saloons in South Denver. However, the arrest of one man led to a challenge in the courts of the town's liquor laws. The ordinance said that anyone who could not pay the fine would spend one night in jail, but the suit said that it was against the Bill of Rights and infringed on the constitutional rights. The town of South Denver won the case too, and the lawyer, Mr. Hipp, received numerous anonymous letters threatening his life. The pressure was on, and in late 1887, Louis York gave up his saloon and moved to Larimer. The Lousters, who had their saloon near Bayard and Broadway, converted theirs to a restaurant and butcher shop. And during this time, construction was a big market in South Denver. James Platt platted Fleming's Grove subdivision, and almost every house was built by his cousins, Thomas Jesse Durbay and Carson Fleming, and they created the Fleming Brothers Construction Company. And they had a lumber yard behind their office on Ellsworth and Broadway. They built well over 1,000 homes in South Denver from pattern books. Typically, these houses were far more common than the architect-designed dwellings that you may see. So you may see copies of your house in other places built by them. One neighbor said that it was no easier for them to build a house and sell it than it was for a cobbler to half-sole a pair of shoes. They were the first to sell their houses on installment plans, which was popular immediately. They had a lumber yard at Ellsworth and Broadway, then moved to First and Broadway, and then they built the Fleming block at 68 to 64 Broadway, which is still there today. They literally built this area. And they also soon started a bank and the First Avenue Hotel. And their corner became the downtown section of South Denver with their first high-rise building. Numerous lumber yards also popped up all around South Denver to fuel this construction. You can see a few of them on the map here. So during this period, the modest homes of early settlers were replaced with substantial brick residences. The lack of a permit to build these residences also helped the boom in construction. Wealthier residents occupied prominent corners or chose Broadway-facing properties. When Broadway commercialized in the 20th century, many of these grand homes gave way to businesses. So you can see on the map here, it's just huge house after huge house after huge house all the way down. The very first water lines were installed on Lincoln Street, and they're still functional today. South Denver bragged that it was a superb water system. It had a superb water system, public transportation, and 2 schools. And Denverites noticed that it was a desirable place to live, and combined with the ease of the streetcars, it allowed residents to get downtown easily. And the Denver Post noted that a steady growth has always been apparent in South Denver. By 1892, the town grew to nearly 5,000 people, and over 250 residences had been built. During this period, Denver was struggling, though, and it needed a more taxable revenue, so it set its sights on South Denver. South Denver was second to the Highlands in growth, wealth, and population. And Loveland and others' dreams to do everything right that Denver had got wrong was becoming a reality in only a few short years. South Denver already had a university, University of Denver, Broadway Park, a sanitarium hospital, Overland Park racetrack, a paper mill, a cotton mill, and its own newspaper, and numerous thriving businesses. And in 1890, hotels started popping up along, including the Fifth Avenue Hotel at 5th and Broadway and the First Avenue Hotel. And a boarding house opened up at Dakota and Broadway. You may recognize this Taylor's building over here. That's where it was. In 1890, it used to be known as the Hotel Grande. And you can see in the picture here, the First Avenue Hotel with the Citizens Exchange Bank right across the street. And up until 1887, the citizens of South Broadway were content to ride the Broadway and 16th Street to the Balloon Loop at Alameda. It took 35 minutes in what they called the Little Green Bobtail Horse Car. From there, the Circle Railroad ran the whole length of the subdivision on its western side. Development was slow at first, but picked up considerably in 1888 when the Denver Tramway Company built a cable car line along Broadway to Alameda and extended it to Yale in 1889. This innovation spurred real estate investment and construction activity up until the silver crash of 1893. And so this map on the left shows all the routes of the Denver Tramway Company, and you can see just how many places you could have got to in South Denver. So William Loveland's vision was in place, and now all they needed was parks developed along the routes. But due to the lack of designated parks, many young men would scandalize the owners and neighbors of the various swimming holes by stripping down and swimming in them whenever they wanted. This caused ladies to not want to drive anywhere nearby these lakes. South Denver eyed the land around Smith's Lake and tried to negotiate with the landowners, John Smith, who built Smith's Ditch, as well as Charles Stebbins to buy the land. They wanted a fortune for it, of course, and Stebbins was part of the group that sued the incorporation of South Denver, so he wouldn't sell. Then a tricky thing happened. The lawyer working on the case to try to obtain the land for the parks discovered that some early records of the town had several property owners promising to donate a portion of their land to build the parks. One of them was a 25-foot by 600-foot stripe near Broadway and Alameda. There was another 5-acre tract in University Park and also Simpson Park. These loopholes in the deeds turned out not to be legal, and the search for more parks continued. Fleming was leaving town after he lost a Senate election, and he offered to sell his home and all of Fleming's Grove. There was great opposition to the price, but those who were for it argued that the site contained everything the town needed. It had the Fleming Grove schoolhouse. The house itself could be used as a town hall. It had a Circle Railway depot on it. The barn could be converted to a hose house because it already had piped water. And most importantly, it had a park. So in 1891, the town passed a $60,000 bond measure to spend $55,000 to purchase James Fleming's house and land and convert it to the town hall. The trouble was, now residents would come to the town hall and air their grievances. 17 homeowners came and complained about people playing baseball on Sundays at the baseball field that was constructed by the Denver Circle Railroad at Broadway and Center in 1882, and said they can't sell the homes down there due to the annoyances. And more people now came to complain down at the town hall. So talk of the annexation began to happen around 1890 when Fleming actively petitioned the U.S. Postal Service to not allow them to have a post office. He said that in all probability, the town will eventually be annexed into Denver, so there's no need. Fleming decided to move on out of Denver, and by then there was a robust water system, public transportation, a church, 2 schools, a university, the big industries like the Werber Car Works, which manufactured all the streetcars, and thousands of people went to Overland Park and for horse races and picnics. Fleming accomplished the vision that everyone set forth to create, but there was still a lot of opposition to the town. The liquor industry was an enemy of South Denver, and as long as only prohibition trustees were appointed, then the anti-vice laws were safe. Eventually, John Russell, again the guy with the greenhouse, was elected as mayor. He was elected and he was a voice for the liquor gang. Fleming was seen as the old element, while Russell was seen as progressive. They grouped together with McIntosh, Vaughn, and Russell for the seats, and they showed up on election day with free-flowing liquor to show folks who they can vote for and what they would get. They brought in working-class folks who were ineligible to vote and created false ballots. These ruffians with names like Polker Jake and Whipsaw Bill scared away voters. Galvanized whiskey bells spent the day throwing whiskey into the voters' crowds. It became ridiculous, and even Fleming's side brought in illegal votes. And at the end of the day, the shenanigans converted to someone stealing the poll book, and violence ensued. In April 1890, Fleming stepped down, and Simeon Vaughn, on the liquor ticket, won the seat as the mayor of South Denver. They went to work right away and built a new school called the Lincoln School at Pearl and Exposition and the Grant School. Now that the liquor laws were relaxed, saloons and roadhouses popped up more and more, and frequently violence broke out. Beer wagons roamed the streets, and Vaughn, realizing how the saloons had gotten so out of hand, realized that the residents were angry. Vaughn vowed to close the saloons, but because he was part of the liquor element, he found himself caught in the middle between what the residents want and what his party wants. And so the citizens were so angry that 130 of them formed the Independent Club of South Denver to wipe out Vaughn and the pro-liquor faction. They outfitted 3 rooms in the San Suchi building, which Sister Eliza now vacated, and laid out their plans. They chose Joseph Shattuck as their candidate. They collectively overthrew Vaughan and Shattuck and became mayor the next year in 1892. They immediately went through and shut down roadhouses, including galvanized Whiskey Bell's Gentlemen's Club on the 400 block of South Broadway. Another roadhouse owner moved in to that same building soon after, and they shut him down too. Then several months later, a madame by the name of Madame Mitchell moved in. And citizens met again at the Sans Souci building and voiced their absolute indignation that these elements are popping up in their town. Instead of waiting for the mayor to take action, the speculation is that citizens went over to the madame's house and burnt it to the ground. No one can prove the real cause of the fire. The boarding house was built on the site of the brothel, and it became home to the South Denver Eye newspaper, Bush and Soetti drugstore, and eventually became the site of the first South Denver post office in 1892. They also tried to eradicate the Whiskey Hollow neighborhood along Santa Fe with their notorious saloons. The Pain in the Rear that used to be the resort area of Broadway Park, resort meaning saloons and prostitution, or whatever, and allows you to do whatever you please, was converted to South Denver's first hospital in 1892 and soon became the Broadway Park Sanitarium. The goal of the leadership of the hospital was to try to solve disease rather than just managing the patient until they die. And the city of Denver was struggling in 1892 and desperately needed tax revenue. They looked to South Denver again since it was second only to the Highlands. And Mayor Shattuck fought off Denver from any annexation talks because he was convinced that all his hard work will be erased once it gets annexed. He said that the city of Denver would license saloons and South Broadway would be lined with dives of the worst order. He started a petition, but had minimal supporters and mostly just housewives and newcomers, as they called it. The petition was laughed at. When husbands heard of the petition from their wives and what their wives had signed, the husbands would disagree and often go and change the record to the opposite light. Supporters feared that once annexed, Denver would ruin their great water supply and take away all their laws and all their virtues that they held so dear for their town. It fell on deaf ears. Denver residents saw it as a wailing protest against taxation, and Shattuck sent a formal protest and fought that the citizens of Denver should have a say in the matter and how they will remain after annexation. After all, the town was started to try to do better what Denver was getting wrong, and they proved that they could do it and the town was thriving. Mayor Shattuck was up for re-election and ran on the anti-annexation platform. His opponent was Solomon Barkis, a bricklayer that lived at 425 South Penn. He was said to be the oldest bricklaying contractor in the city of Denver, and he ran on the platform that whenever Denver makes a fair and businesslike proposition on the annexation question, that the town of South Denver will be ready to receive it and with a good chance of consummating the consolidation. Barkis's party was opposed on the liquor bill also. On April 4th, 1893, the citizens cast 426 votes for Barkis and 287 votes for Shattuck. The trustees voted in received 4 prohibitionist seats, which meant the anti-saloon contingent held the majority in their council. So Mayor Barkis found his first council meeting with a board that was stacked against him. All of the choices for attorney and other nominations were found unacceptable to the council, and Barkis decided to refuse to appoint anyone. And this caused a mutiny of sorts, and they ousted Barkis as mayor temporarily and elected Frank Bailey mayor pro tem in his place. Barkis denied that there was even such an office as mayor pro tem. And the insults flew and protests were had, and some threw punches, and some had to be separated. Barkis retaliated by stripping John Russell and Vaughn's name from the hose houses and renamed them just Hose House Number 1 and Hose House Number 2. These are some of the funny.
So I can.
Yeah, go ahead.
I can speak a little bit to this if you'd like.
Yeah, go ahead.
So the reason that the 4 his trustees were split, 2 on Barkis's side, 4 against him. The 4 against, one of them was newly elected, and he was only elected by 1 vote. So the 4 who were against Barkis wanted to ram their choices for office through immediately because he was wanting a recount. And if the recount went against him, they would have been in the minority. So that's the South of Denver's little gang was the 4 who were against Barkus. And so they were jeered. It's funny is that there's a book about the town of South Denver by Millie Van Wyk, and you can see that she has a definite preference for the 4 who were in the anti-annexation group. And if you read through all the news articles, it talks about how the meetings were packed with people jeering the anti-annexation people. But if you read just Millie Van Wyk's book, you would think that it was just Barkus and some troublemakers. The Rocky Mountain News had articles like at the first meeting, anytime they tried to do anything, the anti-annexation people wouldn't go against it, and it was straight up. They tried to impeach Barkus because they were trying to make motions to appoint people, and including appointing DeWitt Weber, who was a sitting senator. And Barkus said, "You can't appoint a senator as our town attorney. He's already got a job as a state senator." And so they did. It was on straight up on that parliamentary point right there that they decided that they had the right to try and impeach Barkus.
Insane.
Yeah.
So Carolyn discovered all this because she was researching a house nearby her. So we think that's pretty cool. Thank you.
In fact, if you go to that,
there we go. Yep.
So there at the bottom, the Rocky Mountain said that those 4 who were against Barkus were they called them the codfish aristocracy. They said that honesty groans as the tentacles of the tramway octopus crush out the last traces of independence. In those redlined words to the right. So this is all happening though. So the election is at the start of April, and this happens in one meeting after another. So this is like within the first 2 weeks of April, all this is going on. The town attorney asked permission to speak on behalf of the mayor, and he called the four who were trying to ram through the board, the 4 anti-annexation. He called them. He said that this attempt for impeachment was because of a difference of opinion on a parliamentary question. This was a slimy, miserable, pusillanimous excuse to wreak vengeance for a personal grievance on the part of the man who was pushing the matter. It was. I just love the fact that they used the word pusillanimous in the newspaper. And it's Mr. Short did not mince words, and the quartet, the anti-establishment fellows, squirmed while the crowd cheered. And I thought that was fantastic. And it goes entirely against what Millie Van Wyk wrote in the Town of South Denver book. It was just, which woke me up. Go on to the next page. Oh, I had in one more thing. It must not have gotten there. But anyhow, they said that you could go back if you want. They said that they were going to put the impeachment to a vote the next week, but they must have gotten so much pushback they had a meeting on the meeting on the 16th, and the crowd had increased at every meeting through these first couple of weeks, and it had gotten so packed, and they were so every time the four anti-establishment guys tried to push the impeachment forward, it got so rowdy that they almost had to clear the room, and the mayor would bring them back into order. And then after they decided, well, they would push the impeachment vote to the first Tuesday in May. And I think that in that meantime, the remainder of May, they got enough pushback from the town that they just decided to table the whole thing, and it's like they just decided to not bring it up again, and they just ignored the fact that they tried to impeach him, and he went on to be mayor all the way through the actual annexation, and until it happened. But you would think that would have put the whole thing to rest, but once they tried to do that on the first Tuesday, just a few days later, ex-mayor Shattuck actually swore out an arrest warrant for the mayor and the other fellows who had run on the annexation ticket. And Attorney Short then they actually arrested them. They arrested the mayor and the other guys because they said the ex-mayor said that they had neglected to file statements of election expenses in their recent election. And so they went to the Attorney Short for a statement again. And he said that it was a mean trick and was done simply to cause the mayor and the other gentlemen trouble. And that Trustee Bailey, one of the anti-annexation guys who was making all this trouble, had not filed his expenses at the previous election, the previous year, and nobody had bothered him about it. So it was, if you think that our politics are dysfunctional now, there's nothing new about it.
Amazing. Thank you. She did a huge deep dive on it. I can't wait to learn more. So I just want to pause on this one. So this is a view from the Gates Rubber Factory looking south. So you can see kind of the contrast from those first images that I showed where it was just barren, right? With just a couple trees that they're trying desperately to get grow to now this really beautiful, you've got groves everywhere. You've got farms. I don't know if it was green. It was probably, golden like it usually is. So Denver suffered as the 1893 silver panic shrank real estate values. Landowners, businessmen, and miners lost their fortunes overnight. 45,000 workers were out of jobs. They ran a soup line out of Overland Park to try to help those that were unemployed. And South Denver was strapped for cash too, as a $10,000 loan was coming due and the city needed a sewer line desperately. The cost would have bankrupted South Denver, or they had an option to annex into Denver, and Denver would pay for the sewer line. South Denver was very scared of annexation at this point, and when the town of Valverde was annexed, a lawsuit ensued, and South Denver watched and waited for the verdict. Valverde won their lawsuit, and Denver was required to uphold the existing Valverde's town water service and system and their light service. But most importantly, it was required to uphold their liquor ordinances. This made South Denver feel more at ease with the idea, and further exasperating the trouble was South Denver's small population, large area, and growing debts. Much of South Denver's debts were due to the city water system, which was severely dilapidated by 1894. So on December 5th, 1893, the Arapahoe County Court authorized Mayor Barkas to provide a special election to decide if the town should be dissolved and annexed into Denver. The ordinance number 29 was immediately voted in, and the election set for January 30th, 1894. The votes took place in all precincts, and in our Wash Park area, it took place at the Russell Hose House number 1 at Center and Broadway. Despite desires to remain independent from their larger neighbor, financial considerations and slowing population growth spurred voters in South Denver to approve annexation by Denver in a 288 to 100 vote on January 30th, 1894. Women turned out to the vote as well. And this is really special because they were only awarded the right to vote just 2 months prior to this. But some voters felt misled as they were convinced by others that the area would remain alcohol-free post-annexation. And this turned out not to be true. As the council and Mayor Barkas closed up shop on the town of Denver, one of the last things they did was change all the names and numbers of the streets and avenues. The names are now what we know today. And this is why researching your house is often confusing because most streets had a different name. And the annexation was implemented on February 7th, 1894, and the town of South Denver became Denver. So Denver Mayor Marion D. Van Horn was really excited to see what they gained from this annexation. They sent a recorder down to analyze the files, and he realized it would be impossible. He realized that most records and papers were unintelligible, the books were inaccurate, and important documents were missing altogether. There were illegal transfers of funds, unpaid warrants, and $400 missing from water rents because they allowed 33 prominent citizens to use the water for free. Denver's hopeful profit was a newfound debt of $15,331, which is about $500,000 today. And that would be due the next year in 1895. The plus side, Denver now received taxable income of $4 million. So to me, this disorganization is not a surprise when I found this out. South Denver, even before it was a town, was full of doers, right? People who wanted to take action, to get their hands dirty and to get started. And they were the type to sit behind a desk and direct orders here and there by shuffling paperwork. I mean, their first organizational meetings were in an abandoned, deteriorating exposition building that's leaking everywhere, right? They didn't need to have parliamentary procedure to hold them up. And because they didn't have a city hall for a number of years, I'm just imagining each mayor keeping a random stack of papers and records in their desk, and that was their filing system. Some of the vision that South Denver had didn't just stop. So the next goal was a robust park system. So although South Denver couldn't get their prized vision for Smith's Lake as a park, the city of Denver ended up getting Smith's Ditch and the lake and the land that now encompasses Wash Park. At first, it was just a few blocks as shown on the smaller map. Then John's niece finally gave up her own personal lake and gave it to the city. At the time, many lots were platted, but no one wanted to live that far away from Broadway. The red boxes on the right on the map to the red boxes on the map to the left is, well, I guess it's right. Well, whichever one is from 1905. The residents felt that it was not desirable to live, or they felt it was not desirable to live away from Broadway. Plus, the scandal of all the half-naked people swimming illegally, taking dips in the lakes, made the lots of land located around here a place that decent women did not want to live near. So for those reasons, Washington Park was not used much at first. But as years went on, it became the most celebrated park in the system. And the bathing beach was always contentious, but that'll be more about that on a different history presentation. So just to summarize that, it's funny because Wash Park today is like the most desirable spot, right? But back in the day, it was way more desirable to have your house near Broadway to be closer to all the shops and everything. So I really like this map because it really shows what they accomplished. So this is from 1907 and many years later, but it shows the smelters still far outside the South Denver city limits. It shows the university, the town hall and Platt Park, and a big thoroughfare of Broadway and the streetcar system going around. And you can still see the farms and developments starting to form around Washington Park. So this is only a very small piece of the history that was formed under our feet here in the town of South Denver. In numerous conversations with city historians, it's hard to believe that a lot of the history of this town is missing from today's conversations and has mostly been erased. But the town's story is a good reminder of how far we've come. So many people that are drawn to this area still embody that advocate and industrious spirit of those who came and put their time, money, and heart into this area. The vision for a transit-oriented town faded for some decades, but a resurgence in revitalizing the transit routes has returned in this new generation. The earliest subdivisions on both sides of Broadway and both sides of South Broadway have endured through economic booms and busts, social upheavals, and the ever-present saloons for close to 150 years. Although most of the buildings and magnificent homes are gone, next time you drive down Broadway, imagine what it used to look like and look for hints of what's left. So now let's take a look real quick at some of those homes. So these are some of the ones we've lost, before and afters. John Daly's residence. I like that we actually have a real picture of this sketch too. Even cute little houses they featured. I like this one. This looks like a mad scientist house or something. He's got elk horns up at the top here. He's got all these like crazy things. He's got this fountain, a windmill. And so these are some of the homes that we still have. They look a little bit different. There's still a little bit there. Oh wait, these are lost too. Sorry, one got out of order. The thing that makes me upset is you can see a trend. A lot of them are placed by these like 1970s, 1980s. It's like, why did they have to pick that one? So these are the ones that we have left. We have the James Fleming Town Hall in Platt Park. And look at that. We have Atomic Cowboy. We have the John Fox building, Santa Fe. These here. They all look a little different. This one looks almost the same, which is really special. Even this one, they still kept the crazy little window thing. Awesome. Well, that's it. Thank you, guys. Does anybody have any questions? And thanks for sticking around.
I have one interesting tidbit
Yes, please.
that I found in the Rocky Mountain News in the annexation vote, that 1/2 of the voters were women. So they turned out in droves. Yeah, that they even reported in the newspaper who was the first woman to vote, and it said that they were that as a great surprise they thought that they would vote overwhelmingly against annexation, and they didn't. That they were all over the place, like you would expect. That there was women on both sides. They were thinking that they would be a monolith that would go with the anti-liquor element, and they did not. They were split like everybody else.
Awesome.
I have a couple of a mystery and a thought. The thought is, so South Denver was south of Alameda, but seems to have been a sense that it really was north of Alameda somewhat too. And I wonder if there's been some kind of like confirmation of that in documents, articles, or something like that. That, I mean, obviously you've included a lot of information north of Alameda, but I wonder if back then how they actually thought about it. And it's just kind of a thought to come back to. But then the mystery is the Cherry Creek Ditch Company in 1859 started digging a ditch which went right across what would become South Denver. It seems to have been more or less straight across at the Virginia alignment, but there's no map of it. What is said is that it started 6 miles upstream on Cherry Creek, and then went across and eventually joined the natural incline of what came out at the Mexican diggings. And the Mexican diggings was considered a dry stream or a gulch, and so it probably extended somewhat into farther to the east. The way it's described, it looks like they didn't have to dig all that far to get to the natural gulch, and then they just emptied their canal from Cherry Creek into that gulch, and it went the rest of the way to the Platte River. Anyway, that's a mystery. Is that I'm looking for more information on that. I've found some very basic information, which I just pretty much what I just told you. Also, that it was used for gardens, as it was called. But I
Yeah.
would like to believe that it was used for James Beckworth's market garden, because he settled in 1859 at the Mexican diggings, and his garden served Vasquez's market downtown. And so if I could put all that together, I'd love to. And I think it's relevant to the area in question.
I think I have something to help. So I've stared at this photo for a number of years now, and the caption says it's at Alameda.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a ditch going through it. And Smith's Ditch didn't intersect at Broadway and Alameda like this image says it is.
Right.
So it might be your ditch.
That might be Merchant's Ditch, which extended from pretty far south on the Platte up into Baker, crossing Alameda. And it's on a few maps. But that came pretty much later, and it looks like this Cherry Creek Ditch Company's ditch was probably wiped out because Smith's Ditch would have crossed it, and the Merchant's Ditch would have crossed it. So I think Cherry Creek Ditch Company maybe didn't last very long, but it was so much earlier, 1859, that all the later ditches may not even had to think about it. Anyway, it's just a couple thoughts to share, and if anyone has runs across something in their research, I'd like to know, what did people think of the northern boundary of South Denver? Was it a hard concept in their minds, or was it really kind of flexible? And who can tell me more about the Cherry Creek Ditch Company?
The funny thing in all this research, I never thought about a ditch before, and there's so many ditches everywhere, and they're so important to Denver. And cool.
Indeed.
Yeah, I've been having that same question, the first question that you asked about, where does Denver end and where is the rest of the area at this point that we're talking about? Because we have the town of South Denver, but is that when it was formed in, what was it, 1880?
1886 officially, and their boundary. I like your spiraling rabbit hole, Steve. Of did they ever extend it? Because their official incorporated town is as this yellow square here. And what's funny, maybe can you guys see this Google?
Yeah.
Okay, let me hold on. So I noticed this lately, and I hope it pops up. Oh, wait. Denver. Not wherever that is. I'm in Kansas, so it's showing Kansas.
Go ahead.
If you zoom out, at least at my house, is it going to show it? No, it's not. I'll have to capture it. But at my house, if I zoom out on this map, there's a big red sign and a dashed outline that says South Denver in the boundaries of where South Denver was. So I don't know if Google is starting to show like indigenous places or like older towns or things like that. But I'll see if I can capture that one time and maybe send it out, because it was very weird to me. I'm like, I'm researching South Denver, I'm looking on this map, and then all of a sudden Google is showing boundaries of South Denver to me. But
Yeah, I don't know where that's coming from. Well, so north of Alameda was annexed in 1883, so much earlier than South Denver was annexed to Denver. So, but they may have been I'm thinking more of a kind of informal sentiment, which which is harder to prove, of course, because you basically have to read between the lines, or find somebody who gave a kind of a florid description or something like that. But maybe there's something out there.
Well, and if you think about it, most of those businesses and whatnot were at First and Broadway. So
yeah, I thought that there was a periodical published at what's now Walgreens at Second and Broadway, or a little bit south on that block, that was a South Denver publication, but I haven't looked it up again to get all the details. I just remembered that was the offices of a periodical for the area. I don't know if it was a South Denver Eye or if it was something else. So that obviously they chose Alameda and stuck with it, but it'd be nice to see whether they had dreams of a different South Denver or something like that.
Exactly. And I have, so the South Denver Advocate was their first newspaper, and that's where they started publishing all of the ordinances. And I want to get my hands on that. And so I saw a little tidbit that all of this stuff might be stored under like incorporation documents instead of like the History Colorado cataloging the South Denver Advocate as like a newspaper. And so I think it's at the Colorado State Archives. So that would be amazing to get our hands on that, because that's where all the South Denver, drama and history and who bought this land and that land and, all that stuff sort of happened.
There is a Colorado State Law Library in the building that I think you might be referring to, that's open to the public. And I actually sold a book to the librarian there several years ago that was it was a historical atlas of Colorado, all the old maps of Colorado that someone could find as of 1972. A very, very limited edition that I found, and I'm sort of a book person. And when I posted it for sale, the librarian of the Law Library of the state of Colorado got in touch with me and bought the book from me. So,
oh my gosh.
So I've been in that library. I haven't looked around for stuff, but they've got a lot of historical stuff. Is the reason that comes to mind.
Anyone else? Any other thoughts?
Where is that library that he's talking about?
Well, so the Supreme Court building, with which is also an office building for a lot of the state judicial department. It's in that building on the first floor on the north side. I don't know what the access to it is nowadays because they may have changed it, but I came in by the atrium on the north side, and it was just to the left as you walk in.
Oh, thank you.
Another funny thing.
Yeah.
If you have a moment. So, because the women had just gotten the vote, there was procedures on the books to get the women registered once the town of South Denver was annexed. But there was actually a news article published that said a novel question has been suggested, which staggered the members of the Denver board. Previous to annexation, South Denver registered under a different law because they were their own law for registering voters. It says, now that it is annexed, the registration will have to be gone over again. The new law provides for the registration of the women because the women had just been given the vote. But there was no provision for the men of South Denver. So they said, the quandary is, are the men of South Denver disenfranchised? And that was in the newspaper. I thought
Awesome.
that was a hoot.
I wanted to show this a little bit more because just so you guys know, this is a little horse, the Cherry horse car. I love this thing so much because the horse would ride on the back of it as it went downhill. So they trained these horses. And I just think it's so cute. And so they said they used to love seeing the horse's head stick out on the side as it's going down. But then the other thing, hold on, let's see. I loved this picture where, there's all this talks about the notorious saloons popping up, and you literally see you've got little tent saloons popping up all over here, and then this one. So this picture here, I wish I could zoom in a little bit, but the fountain is right here. You can actually see it. And then in this picture, if you zoom into it from the library, so this kind of dark piece of dirt here, there's a sprinkler. They're watering the landscaping. I love that. And then I just outlined here. So John Daly had his own little land here, right? But they ended up expanding, and Rufus Clark ended up expanding too. So all these men became, super wealthy.
Often their spouses were listed as the platter of subdivisions as well. So they were trying to spread out the liability.
And I heard somewhere that there was some tax break or something like that if a woman owned a land versus a man. But I haven't researched anything further into it, but somebody told me that, and that's why men started switching women to be on it. So I don't know. If anyone finds any truth to that, let me know. But you can see here just all the mansions all the way down, and then how few businesses there were. And I just think that's gorgeous. And then I want to point out here, so this is the balloon loop when they talk about it. So I'm coming down from Denver on the horse car or the streetcar, and then it would turn around here right at Alameda. So it kind of reminds me of like the San Francisco cable car routes and stuff like that. But this is essentially where Denver ended, right here. And then I loved this picture too. Number one, because I found an image of this 749 South Lincoln Street from 1910.
Oh,
it's
yeah.
right here. Well, it's behind its twin house, but it's right there. But you can see in this cute little picture the cable car coming down, and somebody's just getting off. And then you can also see where the baseball park was right here. And then they actually, yeah.
Right behind the arrow for the baseball park is the tower for the firehouse that's still there, but the tower is not there any longer.
Right here?
Yep. Yeah, and so that helps position that with respect to all the streets. Union Park was actually the second park there. Sportland Park was built right when the exposition hall was built. And it was built by the Denver Circle Line as part of their promotional, I guess, and it was there for a while. I think I found one map that kind of shows the layout of it, but it's hard to get details on that. But
I think it's cool because it started. I don't know what that was, like maybe 1981, right? Because I think I saw that map on your Trello, and now I was trying to find it over, and I guess I didn't look in the right spot. But so that was about right here, right? And then it became like Union Park, and then they got all mad, and then it became Merchants Park.
Right.
And then I know it's not the same location, but now we're having the soccer stadium around it. So I just think it's funny that the same use on the same land kind of continued for such a long time. I'm just trying to see if there was anything. This image is interesting too. So these are just, folks going across the Alameda Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm trying to find a better image of the Jefferson. But yeah, so anyway, so this used to have a tower, is what you're saying,
Yes,
Steve?
there was it was typical for a fire station to have a tower to hang the hoses so they could drain them. They would hoist them up with ropes, and the water would run out because they probably weren't as durable as they are today, and they had to make sure to dry them out after they used them.
Yeah, they were natural materials, so they would rot if they didn't dry out. So the thing that I'm because South Denver didn't become a city until 1886, but yet there's a few decades where there's things going on, and where the section that is primarily the Baker that we think of today and Spear, what was going on in that area? Was it was Cherry Creek a divider between how people felt like those that were north of Cherry Creek were in Denver versus south of Cherry Creek?
They would call them Southsiders.
It was also called the West Side to some extent. West of Cherry Creek was considered the West Side. The first West High School was in Baker, what's now Baker.
Interesting.
That's why it's called West.
Well, it's hard to get a perfect etymology of it, but the West Side was, for a long time, was considered Auraria, Lincoln Park, and Baker, and it was probably because it was west of Cherry Creek, because there was a real division. Cherry Creek, so Auraria was a community for a long time, and it was not as wealthy as downtown Denver, which is right across the creek, and it was very kind of mixed use kind of area, and it got the short end of urban renewal, but it was also because it had been flooded out in 1965, I think it was, or something close to there. So it was they've displaced a lot of Aurarians, but the whole area had a name which was the West Side, and there was the West Side Vision. The West Side Coalition was a big Latino advocate group that had its own newspaper, the West Side Recorder, which you can find digitized copies of, and a whole lot of at the time it was called Chicano activism. Very, very big episode in Denver's history was centered in the West Side. So the question is, what was the area called at different times? And there's some who really like the idea of it being called Broadway Terrace, and I'm not convinced that Broadway Terrace was really the name for a specific area. I think it was a broad area that included both sides of Broadway, maybe everything south of Cherry Creek on both sides of Broadway down to Alameda or so, roughly. But I don't think that was a common name, although it was used. So someone in Baker really is named his realty company Broadway Terrace Realty Company. He's a great guy, Ron Tarver, and kind of put forward the idea that Broadway Terrace was the right name for Baker specifically, but it was a broader area, and I don't think it was the most popular name for the area. So there's a lot you can do to try to find out names of places, and it's very subjective because different people use different names. Nowadays, it's largely controlled by people who want something like realtors, but and maybe it was the same back then. So
Because I know
yeah,
John Daly's plots of land, the ones in the blue here, he called it Broadway Terrace.
yeah,
So
yeah. It
maybe he was
was
just really trying to make it beautiful and like more
yeah,
glamorous.
yeah, there's a Broadway alluvium, which is kind of convenient, which is the geological formation of the gravel that was distributed by what used to be a raging Platte River when the glaciers were melting. It was a huge raging river that spread gravel for miles on either side. And when people dig into under their house, when they hit gravel, it's usually the Broadway alluvium. It's named for Broadway. Um, but there's also it's all geologically it's also called a terrace because it's a gravel um, kind of a flat gravel area that then is cut down when you get closer to the Platte, forming a terrace. So anyway, I haven't figured out all that, but the naming is just it's a crazy labyrinth, and nowadays people have no idea what they're doing because names spread like wildfire, and there are people with Baker historic plaques on their buildings, um, 3 blocks north of Sixth Avenue, and there are realtors advertising their properties as Baker east of Logan.
What?
So, and Baker is a name that doesn't mean anything anyway. So,
Baker is the more well-known name than Spear, so Spear
yeah,
doesn't get any recognition. But
Spears a tough one, yeah.
yeah. So there's two thoughts that bring me to asking these questions. One is the rivers seem like they were very pronounced lines between where the city developed. Once you crossed over a flowing body of water, you really had to be dedicated to wanting to cross over, or you didn't associate with the other side. It's kind of what it feels like, at least for the first, I don't know, 50, 60 years of Denver. Platte was a major divider and a major barrier between going further west and Cherry Creek in a similar manner, but less so. So it seems like there was a lot more development on the east side of Platte River, and then the lower socioeconomic, I guess, was, as you described, east of or west of Cherry Creek, until you get south of Cherry Creek at Broadway. Then it seems to shift as you go east. So the reason I bring that up is because there's a book club thing going on about the color of law with District 7 councilwoman, and they want to discuss redlining and how that's impacted our areas. And as I look at it, Baker is the primary redline area. Well, that's east, or that's west of Cherry Creek for all intents and purposes. And it's not in South Denver either. So I'm trying to try and put all this together about how did Baker get in a position where it was the major red line position or portion of District 7 as we have now, where Spear and West Wash Park was yellow. So it was the concerned, but it wasn't redlined.
Yeah.
So
Well, it
I don't know.
sounds like we have a interest Would you want to put together a history of redlining of West Wash Park and present it in February? Steve's going to present on the Mexican diggings, and you can describe it, Steve, but in January, so it gives you till February, Thomas, to research and put together a presentation for a history club.
I'm not going to commit on anything, but I'm going to go down this path until I feel like I'm getting kicked out, because I'm not agreeable to the social liberalism of trying to correct redlining and all these things in the same way that that social liberals tend to want to do. I want to move forward, not try and correct the past, even though I want to acknowledge it. But all that to say, I will keep that in mind, and we'll see how far I get and whether I feel like I have enough time and interest in pursuing that.
I'd be glad to share some insights and just historical facts with no value judgment with you on that at some point. Just briefly, since you mentioned it, the Mexican diggings is kind of a foil for a whole series of events that occurred starting in 1857, before the gold rush that is thought of as Denver's founding, and leads up to today's Home Depot parking lot, which caps a contaminated area of land and is actually barely north of the proposed soccer stadium, which may even have some tailings from the events that happened that caused the contamination to be capped. So anyway, that's the very briefest kind of outline of what my talk will be on in January.
Just stay tuned, guys. Awesome. But that's how our history club starts. Honestly, it's anybody who's interested in like a subject and wants a deep dive onto it, and then we just present whatever we have. And it does not have to be, it doesn't have to look like mine. It can be just a few images on the screen. You don't have to do a PowerPoint, but it's just people trying to give people a reason to research and deep dive into something that really interests you. And we're specifically Colorado-ish based, but cool.
I posted a link to the annexation map of Denver. There's many different versions of this you can find, but the one I posted, you click on any of those annexation areas and it gives you what order it was and what date it was. You have to poke around a little bit, but so north of Alameda, that included Baker and a lot of Spear, was 1883, and it was the third annexation in the whole series, which is a very long series. Whereas south of Alameda, which the whole of South Denver all at once, I think was number 9 or something like that. So it gives you a sense of the sequence, and it was 11 years later.
So maybe South Denver really wanted that upper portion, but they didn't act quick enough.
Maybe not.
So they couldn't annex it for their town. Yeah. Well, thank you, everyone. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say that it not being, I don't know how much that not being in the town of South Denver was, but Alameda is a more substantial divider line now than what I think that people recognize, because we've combined South Spear and West Wash Park and just kind of assume that it's all one similar area. When you cross Alameda, it changes pretty rapidly. And I don't know if that stems from how town of South Denver was established and the principles that it was based on, or how that was. But yeah, being in Spear, I have a different perspective than most of my colleagues on Wapna. So thank you.
Well, and I didn't dive into any of the history of Inglewood at all. That's a whole nother thing in the era of South Denver. Pretty cool. There's a lot of funny things in that. But thank you guys. I know this was a really long one, so thank you for sticking with me as I read through it. But I tried to condense it and go as fast as I can. But yeah, stay tuned. Carolyn, which one's next month? Oh, I think next month. I haven't heard from the lady who wants to present, but she lives in a Sears catalog home, and she wanted to present her findings on the kit houses and the Sears catalog houses and how to identify them. So hopefully stay tuned for that one. If not, we will fill in the gap.
Cool.
So, cool.
Thank you very much, Brittany.
You're welcome. Have a great rest of your day and week.
You too, everyone.
Bye.
Bye-bye.